In Chapter 1 of One Piece, the very first character we ever see in the story is Goldie Roger, yet it takes hundreds of chapters for the story to make any mention of his crew. Even though they weren't mentioned though, One Piece however did something very sneaky and actually introduced the Pirate King's crew as early as the 3rd volume. In Bucky's flashback, the very average looking crew that Bucky was a member of was in fact none other than the Roger Pirates, even though the story at that point didn't actually reveal this. Oda later admitted that this was something he had set in stone since the start, and that Roger was always meant to be Bucky's captain. Very interestingly, the chapter featuring Bucky's flashback also gave us our first look at Roger's top guys. And this is for example where we got our first look at Rayleigh, Roger's right hand, almost 500 chapters before his real introduction. And Bucky's flashback is also where we got our first look at Roger's left-hand man, Scopper Gaban, who has now exactly 1120 chapters later been finally fully introduced to the story in the current arc. This pretty much makes Gaban the single longest build-up character in all of One Piece, which is actually a pretty big accomplishment, as One Piece is a story where characters often get set up years before they are fully introduced. Jinbei, for example, is someone mentioned all the way back in the East Blue, but it took over 450 chapters for us to actually see him in the manga. We were also in the last arc finally introduced to the character of Vegapunk, and that was over a whopping 600 chapters after he was first mentioned. However, no character in the story holds a candle to Gaban, where it took over 1100 chapters or 27 real-world years between his first appearance and full introduction, which is absolutely unparalleled and trounces every other ridiculously long build-up character in One Piece. I'm also fairly certain this is a record Scopper will keep holding. At this point, there simply aren't characters in the story who had been set up this early, who haven't yet been introduced. Unless of course it turns out that there were other hidden legends in those beginning chapters, where maybe Roger's executioners were actually some eldritch deities. There is also another very interesting thing about it taking so long for Scopper to be introduced, where it also led to there having been a ton of theories about him over the years. A lot of people, for example, speculated that he was this one old man with sunglasses we saw right before Marineford, or that he could have been waiting for Luffy on the last island of the Grand Line. Interestingly, some fans actually got it right, where I for example found a Reddit thread from 10 years ago where the user thought Scopper was the man with the straw hat who was drinking with Crocus. Now that he's finally here, there's a ton of expectations behind Scopper, and I would argue that there's actually even more potential with Scopper finally meeting the Straw Hats than there even was with Rayleigh. This is all because of timing. Even though One Piece was already 500 chapters in length when Luffy met Rayleigh, we still knew very little about the Roger Pirates during Sabaody, and had only gotten snippets like Roger having fought Whitebeard or him having gone to Skypiea. In the 17 years between Sabaody and Elbaf, however, the legend of the Roger Pirates has expanded considerably. We now know the crew participated in major historical events, like the God Valley incident, and that they fought the who's who of the past era. Just to briefly go over a few of the questions fans have about the Pirate King's crew that we've gotten after Sabaody. What was the egg on Roger's ship? What did the crew find on Lodestar that made them realize that it was not the true final island? Why did Roger laugh when he found the One Piece? And why was he too early? Where did Roger get the straw hat he later gave to Shanks? Why did Roger decide to attack the Rocks pirates at God Valley? What happened to the Oro Jackson? What happened to Roger's Supreme Great Blade? While we do not know when exactly Roger recruited Gaban, we do know that he was at God Valley, which means that he was with Roger on most of his big adventures, and could have been there from the start like Rayleigh, which would also mean that he could have the answers to a lot of the questions I just presented. This chapter seemingly suggests this, with a lot of Gaban's parallels with Sanji, such as him being among the 3 strongest men of his crew, his love of women, or him trying to argue his captain out of stupid ideas. This seemingly follows the trend set by Rayleigh, who just like Zoro, was the right-hand man of his crew, and a swordsman with a scar over his eye. Funnily enough, Zoro is already a bit irritated by Gaban, further highlighting this connection between Gaban and Sanji. We do not know who the cook on Roger's ship was, but at this point, it wouldn't surprise me if it was Scopper, though honestly, that might make him a bit too much like Sanji. Very interestingly, Roger and Luffy are some of the very few pirates in the story who have this clear right and left hand man dynamic. Most major pirate crews we've seen so far in the story either go with the captain having 3 top subordinates, or 1 top officer who is above the rest of the crew. From what I can think of, the only other pirate captain with this same dynamic as Luffy and Roger is actually Buggy, or to be more specific, Buggy when his crew was just the Buggy Pirates, and not the Cross Guild. Shanks has seemingly gone for the more standard pirate crew structure, which I suppose could be another hint that Shanks is letting Luffy be Roger's successor, while he himself is going to be his own man. I plan on making a full video about everything we know about Scopper so far in the story next week, but the thing I'm currently most interested in is one specific thing about him. Scopper seems to have some strange connection with Wano country. More specifically, it also seems to be a connection with Oden. Gaban says that he's wanted to go to Wano for a long time, and the first thing he brings up about Luffy is that he's the man who beat Kaido. He's also wearing a straw hat exactly in the same style as the ones worn by the samurai. While you could say that this is all because Gaban visited Wano with Roger, something to note is that Gaban did not wear this straw hat after the Roger pirates left Wano. Another very noteworthy detail are Scopper's scars, where he didn't have any scars when the Roger pirates disbanded, which means that these are wounds he's gotten within the last 24 years. Now, here's just a quick little theory, but what if Scopper in the past on his own went to Wano and challenged Kaido? Based on everything we know, Scopper seemingly got very close to Oden during his time on Roger's ship. In this chapter, Gaban literally mimics Oden, where he performs the exact same pose as him. If we look at the original Japanese, Scopper also uses the exact same words as Oden does in his catchphrase. When they were with Roger, Scopper and Oden were also seen partying together, and Scopper says that he wanted to make sure Oden got home after they'd gone to Laugh Tale. Scopper even downright cried when Oden finally left. Now, here's my theory. When Scopper years later heard that Kaido had killed Oden, it's possible that he literally sailed from Elbaf to Wano and tried to avenge his friend. We know that Whitebeard also wanted to do this, but decided not to because of the possible casualties. Yet just based on this chapter, Gaban comes across as a lot more reckless of a character than Whitebeard, where he literally says that he loves trouble. If this did happen, Scopper would have naturally lost, as we know Kaido had reigned unchallenged for decades before the Wano arc. It is however something that could explain Scopper's words about Kaido and Wano, as well as his scars and his evident love for Oden. Still, it's just an idea. We do not currently know how old Scopper is, other than the fact that he says that he's younger than Ripley, who herself is 80. If Rayleigh is any reference, Scopper could also be in his 70s, which as far as humans in One Piece go, likely means that he's lost much of his former strength. This could for example explain why, despite him being Roger's left hand, Scopper seemingly admits that he personally could not have stopped Loki, and that they needed Shanks to do it. Also like Rayleigh, however, this does not mean that Scopper as an old man is just useless, and he's clearly willing to throw down with Luffy. What is also interesting is Scopper's specific challenge to Luffy, which is that he wants him to steal the key from him. Now, this is just another idea of mine, but if Scopper wants Luffy to catch him, it could be that he specifically wants to test Luffy's skill with Observation Haki. This could be another connection between Scopper and Sanji, where Sanji is said to be the one of the monster trio who specializes in Observation Haki, and Luffy even notes during Wano that Sanji is able to do things with observation that even he himself cannot. Gaban likely knows from the news that Luffy is stronger than him, and it would make sense that he would want to test Luffy specifically against his own strongest skill, rather than in an all-out fight. What could also motivate Scopper to test Luffy's skill with speed and Observation Haki is if he read that Luffy was the man who beat Katakuri, who was specifically famous for his future sight, and whom no one had apparently even managed to hurt in years. Scopper challenging Luffy is in itself very interesting, as none of the other Roger pirates the Straw Hats have met during their journey have acted like this upon first meeting them, even though all of them have had strong reasons to believe that Luffy is the man who they've been all waiting for. This could be because of what I talked about earlier, where Scopper could be a lot more daring and playful than the likes of Crocus and Rayleigh. It could also be because of just how strong Luffy is in the current story, where there wouldn't have been much of a reason for someone like Rayleigh challenging Luffy when he hadn't even learned how to use Haki yet. It is pretty funny that this is a like father like son moment, where the first thing Colon also did when meeting Luffy was test his strength. Speaking of Colon, this chapter confirming that he is in fact Scopper's son also puts Scopper in the esteemed and rare category of One Piece dads who didn't abandon or mistreat their kids. It also makes me wonder if Scopper might have tried to pull a Roger and see if his child could be Joy Boy, where Scopper also immediately fathered a son after they'd gone to Laugh Tale. While I'm sure Scopper genuinely loves Ripley, he could have also tried hedging his bets by fathering a giant, if he possibly learned that that was the original Joy Boy's race. Even though Colon clearly isn't Joy Boy, I think the reveal of his lineage still sets him up as one of the potential major figures of the era after Luffy, along with the likes of Momo. On the topic of races, Scopper dropped a bit of a lore bombshell by pretty much confirming what was already hinted during Kuma's flashback, which was that the Buccaneers are a hybrid race derived from giants. Some of the races he mentioned were also wholly new to the story. We already knew Wotans, who are a hybrid between giants and fishmen, and we saw one during Long Ring Longland. But Long Limbs and Dosundattas are completely new races to the story. Long Limbs are clearly a mix between the Long Neck, Long Arm, and Long Leg tribes, as this is literally what is said by the kanji used for this race. I personally do not know what Dosundattas are supposed to be, where I guess they could be some hybrid between dwarves and another race based on the name. However, what to me is the most interesting question is what race mixed with the giants to create the Buccaneers. I personally do not think it's humans, and I actually think this is set up for Blackbeard's special race, but I won't go into more detail on this idea here, since I plan on making a full theory video about it at some point, and I don't want to spoil the twist. One last thing to mention about the things brought up by Scopper is that while him marrying a giant is impressive and all, let me remind you, there's still the one unsung hero of the One Piece series more impressive than Scopper, which is the dwarf who actually managed to father a child with Big Mom. May God rest his soul. As far as I see it, he's the one that Ontata should be building statues for, not Usopp. I think you should all click the like button in honor of this brave soldier. The Straw Hat seeing the magic circle used by Shamrock and Gunko in the Giant's Castle I think finally gives us clues on how exactly this ability works. I know a lot of fans speculated that you'd always need another summoner to be at the location for this ability to work, but I personally never agreed with this, since we saw that Saturn on Egghead was able to summon himself from his ship to the island without needing any assistance. These magic circles could in theory be permanent markers on the world, and as long as one character has placed the circle in an area, other characters could use it for travel. Now, Gaban does have an interesting quote, where he says that he sensed strange Haki coming from this castle. From what we saw, Gunko didn't use Haki to deal with the guards, and instead handled them using her devil fruit powers. This also reminded me of a moment in Egghead, where both Jinbei and Lucci mentioned the Elder's strange use of Haki. It could be that this is just nothing, and could be similar to something like the vague mention Blackbeard made about Luffy's Haki in Impel Down. But I wonder, it's not impossible that these magic circles are some kind of Haki ability. Their visual effects somewhat match those of Haki Lightning, and we saw during Egghead that this ability can be cancelled out by strong enough Conqueror's Haki when Emmet used Joy Boy's Haki on the Elders. This Emmet scene also proves that you can imbue Haki with objects, and that it'll stay there for a long time, which could also explain why this magic circle is still here, if it is in fact a Haki ability. Still, that is just an idea. I'm not personally sold on the circles being Haki, but just thought I should mention it. I suppose this magic circle being here could mean that some government character previously came to Elbaf and placed this marker here. which puts further onus on the idea that whatever happened between Loki and his father was a plot created by the government, as they literally would have had a way to travel in and out of the castle. And the circle is in the literal throne room, where the big battle took place. I think this also means that whatever reinforcements Kungo and Shamrock are going to call from the Holy Land are going to immediately butt heads with Luffy's group in the castle. I think this could also be why the story decided to introduce Scopper here and now, since he actually met the God's Knights at God Valley, which means that he could immediately tell Luffy that the characters who arrived are enemies. One last thing about this chapter is that to the great disappointment of Nami, someone else has already stolen all of the castle's treasure. I think the biggest culprit would once again be the government, if they were involved in whatever happened in this castle, since it would have probably been incredibly easy for them to transport all this treasure with the magic circle. We also get a lot of hints in the story that, even though the government is always blaspheming the evil of criminals like pirates, they themselves are also very much thieves. If you want another possible culprit, I suppose the castle could have been looted by Rodo himself, where we know he's a pirate and not the most moral character, and he doesn't exactly sound shocked that all the treasure is gone. Oh yeah, this was once again a One Piece chapter where Who's Who appeared, and where we also got another massive revelation. He's now been present in chapters where Nika was first mentioned, where Shanks declared that he wants to claim the One Piece, where the history of the entire world was revealed, and now he was once again the first thing we saw in the chapter where Scopper was introduced after 27 years of build-up. What a legend, and I say that with utmost sarcasm. If you'd like to see more of my content, you should click here to watch a video where I break down why Shanks could also possess the magic circle ability, since I think this chapter gave a lot of evidence for that actually being the case. Thanks a lot for watching this video to the end.